Copenhagen, and it's been about 20 years since I've been in Denmark, and I love social media, and the reason is a high school friend of mine, didn't know she lived in Copenhagen, knew she was half Danish, saw that I was coming and met me here for lunch. I haven't seen her in 25 years, so that was awesome. And I have that kind of moment all the time where I'm on travel and I see somebody's in town. So it's really bringing the world together. This afternoon, I want to talk a little bit about the business of community. I am lucky enough to work with 80 or 90 companies in my organization who are trying to apply community to all sorts of different functions within their organizations and make that work as a business model. So there's lots of types of communities out there, but what we're talking about is how do you make your business more efficient, make your organization more efficient using communities. And I'm going to start with some things. What I really want to do is tell you a story this afternoon. And some of these things you're probably already aware of, but I'm going to tie it together in somewhat of a unique way, which is over 2 years ago now, we all know the Arab Spring happened. We have all these people doing the patriot movement in the United States who are really very anxious about gun control. And I really want to lecture them that the next revolution is not going to be happening with any kind of guns or armament. It's going to be happening when people take to the streets in such volume that they cannot be ignored because they have all connected online and they have the power of conviction. That's how the next revolution is going to happen. We don't really know what to do with this power yet, and fundamentally what's going on in our organization is power is shifting. Power is shifting from traditional sources to new sources. And of course, that makes people who have had power anxious. And they're anxious for a valid reason, because they kind of see the power shifting. They don't exactly know how it's shifting. I don't know that anybody really understands exactly how the power is shifting, but it's making everything we know unstable. It's happening to brands. One of the most storied media brands out there, late last year, they're in a lot of trouble. You know, HMV has closed a lot of their locations. They canned their social media team before asking for the passwords to all their accounts. So their social media team live tweeted their sacking. And it was quite amusing for the rest of us to watch. I don't think it was quite as amusing for executives at HMV to watch. Most recently, locally to me, I'm in Boston, the Boston Marathon bombings. There's some positive and negatives related to social media and digital from this. One, 2 guys acting independently found out how to make bombs for less than $100 online. That's a scary world when 2 people when one person can do that. But the Boston community also came together really, really quickly and identified the suspects. I'm not sure if they would have been caught if digital did not play such a role. What the Boston Police Department did is they asked for thousands and thousands of images, culled through them very quickly, and identified the people that might have possibly done this, and identified the suspects in 2 days. I think Reddit identified 5 suspects a little quicker than the Boston Police Department, and 2 of them were the suspects. Unfortunately, one of them was a depressed Brown University student who killed himself later. So there's also, we need to be very careful where this power is going. It's really, really powerful in positive and negative ways, and it's disrupting all of our organizations. And we kind of have this perfect storm of change kind of rolling in. And we've got these big technology currents, social media and mobile and big data and the pace of technology that keeps getting faster and faster. But we also have these social currents that are happening. So economic insecurity. I think you in Europe all understand this as well, if not more, than those of us in the United States. In the US, there's a lot of political polarization going on, and in a kind of scary way some of the time. There's lots of big demographic shifts happening. All of that is causing anxiety and retrenchment. People want to go back to what they perceive was a more stable, understandable time. And so a lot of people just shut down what's going on because it's too much. We all know the pace is not going to slow down. It's actually just going to increase and get faster and faster. That has really scary consequences. One, because there's 775,000 apps in the iPhone store. There's an app for that. I don't care what problem you have, there's an app for that. It may or may not be a good one. I don't know how you would figure that out with that many apps in the store, but the amount of data we're faced with is overwhelming, and it's commoditizing. It's also producing 1.2 zettabytes of data, which if you see a graph of the data explosion, it's unbelievable. And actually, in the English language, we only have language for one more abstraction of data. And then we're done. Like, we don't know what to call it after this. Unfortunately, your brain is not improving in its performance. So we're all faced with this rapidly changing environment, and our capacity to deal with that change is not improving. And this is a term that a customer of ours created, but it's based on this presentation, and she said it's cognitive shock. Like, we cannot deal with all of this change going on, and yet it requires huge adaptation to everything we know, the traditional structures of how we get information, how we get services, how we get products, what our needs are, who we communicate and where we get those things from. Everything is changing, and that's a really hard place to be, and we shut down. A lot of us shut down. Those of you who are in the room here with me and in technology circles, we're actually better off than most because we have a front row seat for what's going on, and we're changing with it. Most people haven't really been paying attention, and all of a sudden, all of this is bubbling up and confronting them, and it's a lot. So because of all of that, our organizations need to change. And in biology, we used to think of everything in this tree of life. But we've come to learn that it's really more of an ecosystem. Things are very interdependent on each other. Our organizations have not made that transition, but that is the next thing coming. It's not just a social media revolution, it's how do we organize ourselves to create and distribute value. Our whole value chain and business model, there's an opportunity to do that better and more efficiently because of our understanding and connection to our ecosystem. And we've seen a lot of examples of how some of that crowdsourcing is happening today and how you can really effectively make your organization more porous so you can co-create with customers and co-deliver with customers in a collaborative way that was never possible before. And so the bounds of what is the organization are kind of disappearing in some senses. And some of the new models for companies coming up, Spiceworks and U-Test and GIFGAF, are really interesting, creating their business model around the community or the networked structure. And all companies are going to have to reevaluate their business models as more and more of this gets implemented. And that's scary. But what's been going on for the last few years is that we've been doing a lot of organizational optimizing, but most of this is re-engineering, lean manufacturing, ERP, supply chain. It's optimizing the transactional aspects of our organizations, which is fine. Our organizations have reaped huge productivity gains from that, but it's left them a little sterile and a little inhuman. And people aren't widgets. We don't really respond very well to being told to stay in a box and do one thing. That's not how we're optimized. The other thing that's interesting is that people are only liabilities on the corporate balance sheet, not assets. Software is an asset. It's a rapidly amortizing asset, but we still calculate that asset. Humans are more and more important to the corporate value chain, and yet we are only a liability. So when you go to your CFO, and this matters because the CFO is ultimately the one who tells the executives whether you're adding or subtracting value, they can't tell you if investment in this liability will reap an asset because you're not even calculating it as an asset. So things like professional development kind of go against the grain of how we calculate things. Now, executives know this. This is not to say that no executive out there appreciates investment in human capital. It's to say we haven't translated it to the balance sheet yet. And this is becoming really, really important because people are the weakest link. Because we're so overwhelmed, our transactional systems have been optimized, software is commoditizing, but on either end of those transactional systems and either end of those software algorithms sit imperfect humans who are not rational. We're not rational. We like to think we're rational. We're not rational. And executives haven't really had to think about this because infrastructure used to be the weakest link. It used to be the most expensive thing in the organization. So we optimized our organization around the most expensive asset we had. People are now the most expensive asset that we have. And we're not optimized for human efficiency. Add to that the pace of technology. And we're running faster and faster and staying in the same place. And this is called the Red Queen hypothesis. It's from Alice in Wonderland. And we all feel like Alice because people keep telling us to go faster and faster and faster. And we're experiencing cognitive shock. We can't go faster, and our performance actually degrades the faster and faster that we go. And I see a lot of companies, and you're in the middle of business, and you see something happening, and you're just trying to keep up. So you keep running faster and faster and faster, but everybody else is running faster and faster and faster, and so you're not getting anywhere. And so I have a kind of, I don't know that it's radical, but I have this hypothesis that people need to start playing a different game. We're not in the competitive environment that we used to be, and we have this weak link, and we need to actually slow down. And we need to focus on people, and we need to optimize our people, and we need to create relationships. Because relationships and people are the one thing that are not going to commoditize in your organization. The technology is commoditizing, the infrastructure is commoditizing, the market access is commoditizing, but people are not improving their performance. And you get huge differentiation for developing relationships. You get loyalty. You get forgiveness, and forgiveness is huge in this environment where everything's going faster and faster. You can't keep up. Sometimes you do suffer. If you have a good relationship, people will forgive you for that, and they'll give you time to make it right. If you have a transactional relationship with your customer, they're just going to be angry. They're going to say, I paid you for this. Get it on my desktop now. If you have a more emotional relationship with them, they are going to give you the time and space to do it right. They're going to support each other. And they're going to do better issue reporting. When they are invested in the success of your business in the same way you're invested in the success of your business, they are going to tell you early and often and in very detailed terms what the issues they see with something is in a collaborative way versus a confrontational way. And it also results in preference and patience and advocacy, all of these things that essentially equal free marketing. And I used to be an analyst at IDC, and I used to have all these theories, and then when I went out to build my own business, I had to put the theories to the test. And that's always an anxiety-inducing moment, because you're like, oh, I hope what I thought to be true is actually true. And what we have found is, people share things on social media about how amazing our stuff is, and they're not even clients of ours. We don't feel like we have a relationship with them, and yet they're helping our marketing in ways we could never. We started as a 2-person company 4 years ago, and I don't want to say we're a global brand, but we're known globally. which is amazing if you think about the cost structure of doing that. We heard from Maersk, one person doing social media for this huge conglomerate. It's really cost-effective marketing if you do it well. And you get competitive lockout because people are only going to have so many relationships to service a particular need. And as I mentioned before, part of the problem, and I'm reading this book called The End of Big. It's by Nico Miele. He's a friend of mine, but he's also a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School. Whoops, that went too far. And he helped revolutionize the election process in the US. He worked for Howard Dean and really did a lot of the digital infrastructure that then Obama used later. So he's an innovator, and he really talks about the decreasing competitive advantage of being big. Not that you can't still win by being big. Sorry, I keep flipping the wrong slide. But market access has commoditized. Again, looking at our own business, we can compete with Forrester or McKinsey, or we don't really have a direct competitor. But as two people, we can now compete with organizations that are established and much bigger than ours because we have something valuable to share. That should be a real threat to any of your executives if you work at a big company. You can now outsource your supply chain in a day somewhere in China and have a CAD/CAM system set up on your laptop and set up a manufacturing business as an individual. Like, that should be scary to any of your big companies, and you really need to do some soul searching around what is our core competency, what do we want it to be, you have the opportunity because there's a lot of existing relationships, but they're mostly transactional relationships. Can you move those relationships into a more empathetic and co-value producing relationship? Can you add relevance and meaning and shared value to your customers' lives? We were having a conversation at lunch, and I said, you know, part of the reaction to some of Jeremiah's comments about how is content marketing the new tax on products that aren't very good, and I said, I don't think that's quite right. I think content marketing is the tax on irrelevant products, meaning products that don't solve a meaningful problem, because you don't get passionate advocacy for something that isn't solving a meaningful problem. And so you have to pay a tax because it's harder to get that advocacy. But if you're sharing a big, important problem, there's huge opportunity to form communities. And I'll get to the community piece in a second, which is we all know that relationships require time and resources, and they're really time intensive or cost intensive. And we've always had this direct engagement. What's happened in the last few years is social media has come onto the scene. And social media has a really important role, but it doesn't get the relationship too far because there's only so much you can do on a Facebook page or on Twitter. There's no content management. You can't have a multivariate conversation about many different angles of a complex problem. You can get that encounter, you can get the recognition, you can start what I call the development phase of a relationship, which is assessing fit. I have a need, you have a solution, is that a good fit for me? And the more complex the product, the longer that assessment of fit takes. I think communities play a really important piece in between kind of a social media relationship and a direct engagement relationship, in that you can have really complex, multivariate, lengthy conversations and develop relationships between people, develop advocacy and that loyalty over time in a scalable way. I had to redo the definition of community for the web because the traditional definition of community is very geographic-based. It's place-based. And communities online all of you manage them, they spill out everywhere. You can't just have a home base anymore because you see each other on Twitter, you see each other on Facebook. So then what defines a community versus everybody on Twitter? I would say everybody on Twitter is not a network. Everybody on Facebook, that's 20% of the globe. That's not a community anymore, that's the world. So then a community, for me, is a group of people with unique and shared values, behaviors, and artifacts, meaning they're all trying to share a shared problem. They're talking about it in the same language, and there's some resonance between that somebody outside of that community could look at them and say, they're working on the same problem and I am not, or the other people around them are not. And for me, when you get back to looking at the business benefits of communities, they're really huge if you can cede control and you can accept collaboration with people that you cannot control. They maximize your investments because they disintermediate. And what I mean by disintermediate is on social media, you are always the point person on the Facebook account or on the Twitter account. There has to be somebody from the organization moderating every conversation there. If you get a community environment, you can have one community manager for many, many, many people, and they don't have to be involved in every conversation in that community. They only step in if there's an issue that the community cannot resolve on its own. And so you can really, and communities also develop a culture that then when more people join, you have an expectation of how those people behave. So if you can get a set of people to change their behavior to co-create value with you, whether it's advocacy or innovation or customer support, when new people come into that community, they will come into that culture and participate in that way. It's really powerful way to extend your organization. They speed information transfer and alignment. So internally, the CEO can have a blog. And CEOs actually are much more receptive to this message than their direct reports or middle management, because CEOs have always been protected by their executive teams, by handlers. And a lot of them really do want direct interaction with people so that they can share what they're thinking about and get authentic feedback. CEO blogs allow them to have conversations with the entire maybe 50,000 people in their organization at once and get feedback really, really quickly. Same is true for any kind of innovation, and increasingly, if you're a knowledge worker, you're an innovator. You're trying to do something that has not been done before. I don't think most knowledge workers consider themselves innovators, but that's essentially what is happening. Anything that's transactional or standardized is being taken care of by technology, or could be taken care of by technology. The other really important thing here is communities build buy-in and shared ownership. So if you ask your customers, if you exhibit vulnerability, and this is really hard culturally for executives, and say, we don't know the answer to something, can you help us? And your customers help you solve that problem, it's their problem they just solved. And they can turn around and become advocates for that solution because they own that solution. It's their solution. It's not you foisting a solution on them. Intuit does this phenomenal thing with their communities where they flipped the marketing funnel on its head. They actually add functionality to their product before the functionality exists, and they test conversion rates on the click-throughs on that new feature. And what people get when they click through is, would you like to join a community to help us build this product since you're interested in it? All of a sudden, they know exactly what their demand is going to be before they've invested a dime in creating that product. That's crazy in terms of like wiping out wasted development. I'm an old product manager, and Like, I can't imagine doing it anymore without a community to give me that constant feedback. JCPenney, a big retailer who's in trouble for other reasons right now, but they use market research communities of 300 or 400 people to sit with their product lines throughout the supply chain to wipe out costs because they're getting immediate feedback all the time on every decision they make. That's very customer-centric. They have brought their customer into the organization. SAP, which Jeremiah mentioned earlier, their mentors get invited to global developer jams, internal developer jams, to help the SAP engineering teams innovate. That is kind of a radical shifting of who's in the organization and who's responsible for what. And of course, it reduced costs. And actually, the reducing of costs is the easiest thing to measure if you're really strapped to look for an ROI measurement. It's easiest to measure replacing an expensive product with a crowdsourced product. So support communities are really easy to measure because you know exactly what the cost of a support ticket is, and you can translate that pretty easily. Further afield, when you get to internal communities, it's a little harder to measure the productivity shifts because it's just further away from the revenue and the cost picture externally. But reducing duplication of effort is huge internally. We repeat so many things, and actually, we're moving into the lazy man's era, I keep saying, because what we've been taught to do is be perfect and deliver perfect things. And what we do internally in organizations, if we can't find something easily and we spend a lot of time looking for it, but we still can't find it, we replicate things. And really, a very high percentage of the things we do in organizations, at least in the very large global organizations, have already been done. They've already been solved. You just can't find them. So a lot more of our work is going to be finding things and adding to it versus duplicating that effort if we can create internal systems to make all of that work more visible to each other. Eliminating waste is another big thing. Deutsche Bank had this great initiative where it was an office supply initiative of all things. Like, it seems pretty basic, but Deutsche Bank spends millions of dollars on office supplies every year, including equipment. And they basically asked people to return equipment through the social media, their social network internally, and they'd reward them with a donation to the United Way, or Oxfam, I can't remember which it was. But it wiped out millions of dollars of costs, and they used that ROI calculation to justify the spend, and it wasn't all the benefit they were getting from their internal network, but it was huge. So there's a lot of ROI calculations you can get, but at the end of the day, communities generate the best value that you can never buy. And what I mean by this is you cannot buy advocacy. And advocacy by your customers is trusted much more than you going out there and speaking on your own behalf. If somebody says, Rachel Happe is wonderful, that's far better than me standing up here and being like, I'm wonderful. That doesn't play very well. The same is true for brands. So you can't buy that. You can't buy customers supporting each other who share a common use case that's not supported by your company. So your support team is going to get in the phone with them and be like, that's not a supported use case, I'm sorry. You've just shut off a whole micro revenue stream because you can't figure out a business model to support it. But it could generate a lot of money. And the long tail of that, if you have enough of those micro use cases, is significant. So I want to take you through some truths about community that I think make it really hard for businesses to adopt them. Communities have a very different dynamic than transactional workflow processes. And the first one is this, which is most of the time when we make an investment, we kind of have some kind of predictable algorithm that says when we make an X investment, we're going to get Y, and if we make a 2X investment, we're going to get a 2Y. And, you know, we're really comfortable with that because we kind of know we can scale it up or scale it down depending on how much investment we have. Communities have a curve that looks more like this. And this is an ideal community curve, not the community curve most of us have. Although I will say I was interviewing somebody from the Department of Education, and in the US, we don't think our government is all that efficient. So, you know, there's a lot of call me surprised. He brought me a community growth chart that looked almost exactly like this. I was blown away. He had launched an internal network for collaboration between the different executive branch departments, hadn't advertised it much, and it had grown to 80,000 people. It was amazing. So if you do it well, it has amazing payback when you get to the scale portion of this. However, if you look at this, this is a wildly successful community. It takes a lot of investment before it ever looks like a positive ROI curve. And so the question I get, and I'll get to this, well, so more communities look more like this. They kind of have a positive ROI curve, but kind of float around. Even more look like this. And this is a particularly marketing-centric one because marketers like treating things like campaigns. And that's the way we're used to considering things. So we launch it. And we're like, the community is out there. And we send it to everyone on our mailing list, write it once at the get-go, and people come and they consume all of this content. But there's no relationships, and there's no culture, and they go away. And it's very hard to get them back. Because you didn't create a culture or relationships or anything that would inspire people to create their own content here. So people treated it just like another content website. So they're measurable, but not immediate. They just have a different investment reward profile. And then, so the next question is, well, how can you tell if you're failing or succeeding when you're here? And so we have something called the community maturity model to kind of help companies think through this. And we take the approach of there's different phases to a community. And there's the early phase, the emergent phase, the robust community phase, and then a kind of a networked or transformative phase. This phase, you're looking for behavior change. Can I get my constituent group, whether it's employees, customers, partners, what have you, can I get them to do something in a different way than they do it today? Can I get them to help each other? Can I get them to advocate for me? Can I get them to collaborate in a different way than they do today? And at this phase, you shouldn't be looking for scale at all. In fact, you should limit that community until you can figure out what the triggers of behavior change are. How can you effectively get people to change how they do something? When that happens, people will be so excited that this is possible that they will pull more people in, because it's a more effective, efficient way for them to get what they need, not for you to get what you need. Once you have pull, you can grow. I have a saying, growing communities is like making risotto. I don't know how many of you cook, but you can't add all the chicken broth and the rice at once because it just sits there. It doesn't absorb. And you have to let things absorb a little bit before you can start adding more to that. Once you have a robust community, you transform the way you do something. For tech companies that have support communities, they will never go back. They don't even know what the cost of going back is. We work with a company called Autodesk in the US. They do CAD/CAM. They're in Europe too. They have had an online support community for 15 years. They're having ROI problems now because they don't know what support looks like without a community. So it will change how you deliver on a functional goal if you use communities. Now, communities need one more thing than most business processes, or Okay, most initiatives. So most initiatives need a purpose and they need a business plan or a business goal, meaning they have to have a purpose. The one thing we add here is member needs, meaning what's in it for the member. If a member of a community is not getting more out than they're putting in, that's going to be a failed community because you're asking them to willfully participate. The reason people participate in communities is because they get more out of it than they contribute. So figure out what that business plan is for the target member. What are they getting out of this? And then have the purpose and the business need. The other thing to think about when thinking about communities, and this will change how much investment and resources you have to contribute, is you really need to understand the target member characteristics. What target market are you going after? We had a client who wanted to build a community for cardiologists, and they wanted to make the lead cardiologist the community manager. And I was like, you know, I'd rather he save somebody's life. I really don't think that's the guy to sit and ping people online to make sure they're commenting on posts. Like, there's got to be a more efficient way of doing that. The other aspect of a community like that is cardiologists are not at their desks, they're mobile, they don't have a lot of time, and they want to find answers in and out and fast. And so they're going to need more community management than another example I give is baby center, where there's new mothers at home who have a high need to learn, who have the time to figure stuff out, and their needs are so high and they have the available time that you hardly need any community management at all because they kind of self-combust. But really understanding that characteristic and where they get their information today and how they get their information today and whether there's other communities out there will really define what you need to invest in to make that community work. And then you have all these investment levers. You have community management. You have your tools. How easy is the tool to use? You have content and information. You have peer involvement. You can give people unique access to things. And it's one of the favorite tricks of advocacy programs. Give people access to your people, your executives. So there's a variety of levers that you can invest in to create that engagement. But if you don't understand how much time and how much need to learn your target profile has, you'll have a hard time figuring out the community picture. Lastly, understand how communities fit into workflows. Get down to the specifics and say, what do you do in a day? Like, when do you email? When do you communicate with people? And would that be better served in a network environment? Somebody was saying we can't share with 100,000 people, so we share with 40, and that's completely inappropriate. Well, in a network, you can share with 100,000, and it's very opt-in for them. And so that's really a more appropriate way to share a lot of information that we share via email today. I'm going through this process really quickly, but most knowledge management or knowledge worker process start with kind of information and data inputs. It's a great place for a network environment, so you can find out what you don't know. Is one of the bigger problems we have today, is we just don't know what we don't know. And by putting your work out there, somebody else who knows that you don't know something will highlight that for you. Going to facilitated discussions in a smaller community that shares your context is also a great access point here. Consolidating all of that really takes an individual, but then when you're at an analysis phase, going to a community of practice of people that share your context, so you can ask them if your hypothesis and analysis sound right to them, increases the quality of that analysis and again identifies risks and gaps in it. When you write a report on whatever you're doing, again, sharing that with the community or the work group before you go out to a bigger community. Stakeholder review. This might be an executive community. It might not be the same community you go to when you're looking for information, but you may have a discussion in a private executive community for that. And then by the time you have a go, no-go decision and you push that out to either your company or the world, you've already educated a whole bunch of people along this pathway that can answer questions and understand why you're working on something. So lastly, I'll just introduce this community maturity model. We have 8 competencies and 4 phases of maturity that we think are useful either as a checklist as a community manager, meaning you can sit there and say, have I thought about strategy? Have I thought about leadership? Have I thought about cultural implications? Or you can use it to assess the performance of your entire organization and say, where are we on this? Where do we want to be? And what kind of initiatives do I need to slot in to get us from A to B? And we have a lot of research that we also organize in this way that's free on SlideShare if you just look for the Community Roundtable, and it'll tell you what we've learned from the 90 companies we work with about the practices they use in each of these areas. So the takeaways for me today are, I don't think you're going to win just by going faster. You can try. I'm tired. I'm tired of keeping up, and I keep up fairly well. And I think relationships are what's going to give me the advantage, not the keeping faster and faster and faster. And I think that culture is the new competitive advantage, and sharing that culture is a way to get people locked into your approach. And it's also why I think community building is strategic and urgent. There's a really high first mover advantage here. People only have so many relationships, and communities take a long time to develop. So the sooner you get started, the better off you'll be a few years from now. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure. That was kind of a high-level wrap-up. I hope it helped put some things into context and kind of share how I think about the changes going on in the world today and why communities matter so much.